Hi, this is Adam Fisher, and throughout this video series, we're going to learn how to use the Dreamweaver software to produce responsive web design using HTML and CSS. First thing first, in web design, you want to create what's called a root folder. And if you're on PC, you can basically just right-click on your desktop, go to New, Folder, and in all lowercase, I'm going to type out root, and I'm going to do an underscore, or you can also use a hyphen if you like, underscore folder. You want to use all lowercase, and you want to avoid using spaces for web design needs for FTP, which stands for File Transfer Protocol. Without spaces and caps, the files are able to transfer much more easier. If you're on a Mac, you would actually go up into under what's called the Finder section on a Mac, and you hit File and then go to a New Folder. So once your folder's set up, we have what's called our root folder for FTP publishing, and you actually want to save all your contents, images or text type, anything that's equivalent to files that are associated with your website and web pages across your website into this folder. You'd want to zip this folder and submit it as your project submission. So launch Dreamweaver, and inside the Dreamweaver software, the first thing you want to do is you want to go up top and go to File, and you want to select New. And in the file New, you want to actually select HTML. We want to do HTML5 and hit Create. And this should be your opening screen. First thing first, we've got to set up what's called our CSS style sheet in order to use CSS to drive and make the web pages look pretty, in a sense. You could say it that way, for HTML purposes and for your web page building purposes. So the first thing you want to do is just click somewhere on stage in your white area, and as soon as you click, you're going to notice how your body highlights here, and that's exactly what we want. Go on up to what's called plus over here, and it should be under what's called the CSS Designer. Hit the plus key, and you want to actually select what's called Create a New CSS File. Once we do that, your submenu appears, and inside here, you actually want to type CSS, and you want to click the Browse tab, and you want to track down that root folder that's on your desktop. And I'm going to select it, and I'm going to click Open. And inside here is where we will actually save our CSS style sheet, and it will all kind of come together full circle here in a bit. I'm just going to go ahead and name that file name CSS and click Save. And you'll get this little message that comes up, and just click OK. And then you just basically click OK. And if you notice, we have what's now a CSS.css tab. I will click on this tab in order to code in my CSS, and this will be kind of like the part of the driving force for your source code, which is going to be your HTML. Okay, so now we got the CSS style sheet set up. First things first, we're going to build basically 5 divs here, and a div is a box in which you can place images and text content into for your web page design needs. So the first thing we're going to do is actually, I'm just going to go right here what's called body, and you notice it's got the open and closed greater than less than signs for all HTML purposes. We have a beginning body and we have the ending body, and anything that's beginning always has the greater than less than signs around the name, and the ending part of that will always have this / in the text right out. So we're seeing that we have a head and we have our body. Everything's going to be built within the body. So I'm just going to hit enter down a few times after the first one until I enter it down. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually create what's called a div, and we're going to create our first div inside this this HTML code. If you need to move it up at any time, just kind of scroll over that little middle line, that bracket, and it can build it down. You can build it back up. And I'm basically just going to create a div. So I'm going to start with greater than sign. I'm going to type in div, and I'm actually going to give this div an ID, so I'm going to type in ID, and the ID is pretty crucial. This is what we use to identify certain properties that we can use under our CSS. So if we assign an ID to a div, instead of just writing a div out like so, where I could basically just create this div, right, and then have a / div, and that would be the beginning and ending part of a div, I can actually assign what's called a div ID. So I can actually type in ID, and the really cool part about Dreamweaver is when you're typing this stuff in, it actually comes up for you. It's like a little user help menu. So I'm going to type in an ID, and automatically, if I select that, it automatically selects in what's called, places in the equals quote quote. So if you notice again, if I do that, this is really great about Dreamweaver. Type in ID, and I say in this little subcategory comes up. If I select it, it automatically types the code out for me. Otherwise, if you want to do it pro, hit the equals, and you do a quote quote, and then we can actually name this ID. Now, what's really cool in web design is you want to name everything between quotes. So I'm going to actually name this container. And then I'm actually going to go ahead and do the closing greater than less than sign. Okay, I'm going to hit enter down, and we're going to actually create what's called a header inside this container. Now, the container will be the main body, if you can think of it that way, the one main box that holds all the contents. And then the next div is going to be, let's see, div ID instead of div equals quote, and I'm going to name this one header, like I said, and that with a quote ending. And then we'll go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and end this div. So I'm going to go ahead and end this div slash, because this div is actually, and other divs we create, is inside the container. So we don't want to actually include the ending for the container just yet. We want to go ahead and build it individually like so. I'm going to hit enter down, and I'm going to type in another one and type in div. And I'm going to do ID. Yeah, let's go ahead and select it this time, make it easy on us. And then inside the quotes, I'm going to name this one sidebar. So we're going to have a website with a sidebar. I'm going to make it left, and I'm going to have this ending quotes. I'm going to finish it with the greater than less than signs, and I'm actually going to go ahead and fill in and close this div like so. Now, as soon as I hit that forward slash, it went ahead and typed it out for me, which is great. So me personally, I like to go ahead and enter them down. You can do it either way you want, but this at least gives us a nice organization. And notice how I'm also adding some spaces. I'm hitting enter to add spaces between my divs. So now we have what's called a left sidebar. And the left sidebar, if you've ever seen web design, is actually the sidebar that runs down on the left side of the screen. All right, I'm going to actually go to hit enter down a few more times. I'm going to go ahead and create another div, assign it an ID. And inside this, we're going to name this sidebar right. There we go. Go ahead and finish it. And let's go ahead and open up a new one. Let's close that div. We're going to close it. As soon as I hit that forward slash, it adds it. And enter that down. Closing div. All right, so we're going to have a left sidebar and a right sidebar, just like you see if you go to like email or websites that have the two small bars running down the sides. And then we're also, in this lesson, we're going to add what's called a footer, because every website has to have a footer. So in between the quotes, I'm going to go ahead and type in footer, and I'm going to go ahead and close it. Perfect, and I'm going to go ahead and end that div. Me personally, I like to put, like I said, the closing div text at the bottom of the beginning. Kind of just looks a little bit more organized. That's me. And then to close everything, where all this indicates that all this contents can be inside your container, you got to add one more of these, because that one would be associated to the container. So I'm going to go ahead and add one more closing div. And as soon as I hit that forward slash again, as that closing div, and notice when I click on it, it understands that that's the closing div for the container. So anyway, all this content is going to be inside our main container. Our container box is going to hold all that content in order to build a website. Okay, so now we're going to use CSS to actually modify our container, header, sidebar left, sidebar right, and footer. In order to do so, you're going to click on what's called the css.css tab up top, which is what we set up. This is our CSS style sheet. And I'll just go ahead and enter down one time. You don't have to, but I like to kind of keep things a little more organized. You want to make sure that's the beginning, of course, your character set, naming file. And I'm actually going to start with a number slash. So I'm going to do a number slash, which is actually Shift 3 on your keyboard. And once this is applied, this number is actually understanding that it's referencing an ID back here in your source code. So we're going to go ahead and one of the IDs, if you notice, we named one of the IDs container. So let's start with the container, because that's going to be the main box again that contains all the content of the web page. So back on CSS, after that number sign, I'm just going to type in container as it matches what we have here. Okay? And after container, I'm actually going to go ahead and hit space. I'm going to start an opening bracket. So I'm going to hold shift and hit the opening bracket key that's on your keyboard. It looks like so. And the first thing I'm actually going to do, and it looks like this kind of bracket, I'm actually going to type in what's called width. And the width we must have because this is going to indicate the size and the width of the box that all the content's going to go into. Hit colon, I'm going to type in 1,000 pixels. And in order to type in pixels, you just type in px. And that basically identifies, and Dreamweaver understands that it wants, you want to build this web page or website 1,000 pixels wide. I'm going to hit a semicolon, and I'm going to hit space, and I'm actually going to type in what's called margin. Now the margin is basically the centering of this, this container, this box. And if I hit colon, and I'm actually going to type in auto, or I can just select it from this little submenu here. I want to type in auto. That means, and Dreamweaver understands that it's auto-centered. So no matter what resolution is seen on monitors, that box automatically lines up perfectly for it. I'm going to hit a semicolon that ends that. So you want to use a semicolon at the end of every naming convention for your ID here. I hit space, and we're going to do background color. So I'm going to type in background. And I'm actually going to hit the minus key or the hyphen, right, and type in color. I can select again from the little submenu here if I wanted to. If I want to type it in and go pro, no problem. Go colon on that, so it's hold shift, hit semicolon on your keyboard. And you're going to notice a little color selection comes up from the little submenu. I like doing it this way, so I'm just going to double click that color option, and then we can indicate what kind of background color we want. Now, in web design, for easiest reading purposes, from my previous teachings and studies, I've always learned that white, gray, and black is the best colors to use. Do a neutral, just a solid neutral color in the background for the best reading purposes. However, if you're doing black background, make sure you got white text. Hence, you're doing white background, make sure you got black text. I'm going to do like a mid-tone, let's just do kind of like a light gray. That looks pretty good. Once I get my gray selected here, I'm just going to left-click outside my little color selection box. And that is really cool. It automatically updates it with the hex characters. So that gray is C5, C5, C5. And that's beautiful. So I'm going to actually just hit semicolon and end that, hit spacebar. And then what I actually want to type is what's called min height. So I'm going to type in MIN, and I'm actually going to hit the hyphen. If you notice, it's already came up in the little submenu. And it's HEIGHT. And I'm going to hit colon, and this min height, this indicates your vertical length. So I'm actually going to make this one 800 pixels just for this lesson here. And then I'll hit the semicolon to end that. And then what we want to do is we actually want to go ahead and fill it in with the closing brackets. So I'm going to hold shift and hit that key on my keyboard right next to my enter key. And I'm going to use that closing bracket. So what does this do? Well, this is our main container. So if I go back to the source code now, and I actually, if I want to just kind of scroll over my middle bar here that divides between the code and the actual what we're seeing up here is what's it's under split, as you have noticed since we opened Dreamweaver. Some of you might have accidentally had code automatically selected. If you hit split, you can kind of see what's going on in the updates. If I just move this down slightly, we're noticing that our container is now already, it's positioned in the middle of the screen, and it's ready to go and receive content. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this so we can view it in our browser window. I'm going to go to File, I'm just going to hit Save, and I'm going to track down where we want to save. Now remember at the beginning of this video lesson I told you we want to make sure we save everything in our root folder. So I'm going to name this Index, because this is basically going to become our home page of our website. Now all web servers, when you purchase web space to publish to the internet, they all have an index.html. So that's exactly what we're doing here. This index page which you build would override that index page, and then all the other pages you build would link into it. So once you FTP publish it to the web server through whatever web host and provider you go with. So I'm going to hit save. I'm going to name it all lowercase, of course, index.html, and hit save into my root folder. And if we just want to go back and just check this out, just go to File, Save As. Notice that in my root folder on desktop, I have my index page HTML. It's exactly what we want. So once it's saved in Dreamweaver, we can go into what's called File, and we can preview in our browser. Notice I got Firefox, Chrome, and Explorer. I'm just going to use Chrome because it has better variations of the RGB. And we're just going to check it out. And sure enough, here's what our page looks like right now in our web browser. I've got a container with that neutral gray we built, and it looks great. The only thing I'm noticing right now is it says Untitled Document. So we want to make sure that we name our document, and we'll do that toward the end. You want to make sure that none of your tabs say Untitled Document. You actually want to change the title of your web pages so it aligns with the name of your website. So I'm just going to go ahead and just close this out, and we will proceed and move forward. So the next step we want to do, we're going to go back under our CSS. And if you remember, we made a container just recently. And now if I go back to source code, notice that our next one in line was the header. So let's go ahead and do the header. Back in CSS, hit that tab, enter on down. And I'm going to start with the number slash, hold shift, hit 3 on your keyboard. Should create a number symbol. And I'm going to type in what's called a header. And this will be the header. We're going to build the header. So I'm going to hit space. I'm going to start with an opening bracket symbol, and we're going to start with width. And this width, I'm actually going to use what's called percent. So Dreamweaver also reads as percent. So if I go 100% instead of doing through pixels, it's going to work more effectively. I'm going to go back to my container, and I can now change this to, let's say 80%. And it will be 80%. If you notice the update in because Dreamweaver has a live mode, already made its update. So if I change it to 80% from 100, there's the 100. If I again go back down to 80, right? Watch this. And wow, yeah, absolutely. Doesn't it doesn't update. It's now 80% of the browser window. So, and it's auto align, which is really really great. So my header is going to be 100% of within that 80%, if you can think of along those lines. I'm gonna hit the semicolon and close in. I want that 100%. Let's do a background color. Just gonna do a random background color for my header, and I'm gonna select from the list. I could type it in if I wanted to. Go gung-ho. I'll say if I want to do actual type in color. And once I hit that colon, remember your little submenu comes up. I'm going to do a select from the color selection. Now here again, going back to what I said, you want to make sure you're doing like a neutral color, such as like a white, gray, black. In this case, we're just going to do a standard default color, and later we'll do some more stuff here. But I'll just go ahead and just grab a random color. Let's say I'll do like just a light blue, just to kind of get like some kind of layout going here. That looks pretty good. Left click outside that little selectional box, and that color hex character comes up, and that's perfect. Hit a semicolon and close that out. Hit a space. Now in this case, we don't want to do a min height. Min height indicates the length of that container that we built, which is its limit. Now we can give specific heights, which is exactly what I want to do. So for my header, I want to make it a height, just standard height right there. And I'm just going to do a height of 150 pixels. And I'm going to hit semicolon. And then I'm going to hold shift to hit that bracket and do that closing bracket. And you've already seen the update. My header now is 100% fitting inside, and its vertical height is 150 pixels running across the top here. And that's exactly what we want. Okay, so now let's build the sidebar. So again, back in our source code here, if we just use the middle mouse wheel on our mouse, or if you want to just use that little scroll bar there, you can kind of scroll down and see what we got. Remember that we have the sidebars. So we have a sidebar left and a sidebar right with the hyphen, the dash in the middle. So back in CSS, I'm going to basically just go ahead, left click at the very end of my bracket, hit enter down. And I'm going to start that number slash and start that number symbol, and I'm actually going to type in sidebar left. just how it looks back in your HTML. And starting with the sidebar left, I'm going to hit a space. I'm going to start with that opening bracket, and I'm going to type in width, and I'm going to do 150 pixels. Okay, I'm going to end that with a semicolon. And then I'm actually going to do a height of 500 pixels. The semicolon. And then we'll do a let's do a background color, just to go, so all our contents have different background colors or colors in order to see how their the hierarchy structure is developing here. Background color. Remember, you got a hyphen, and we're going to type in color. Oops. And you're going to end out with a colon. And I'm going to type in, let's just do red. You can type in an actual name of a color in this case. You don't have to select it from the menu. And I'm just going to go and end that with a semicolon and closing bracket. All right. So the left sidebar is going to be the same width and height as the right sidebar. So I'm just going to go ahead and after this hit enter down. Again, do the number symbol sidebar. And what's really cool is when you're typing it, you notice that it already automatically appears in your little submenu. Select it, right, opening bracket. Let's just go ahead and repeat what we got here. Width is going to be 150 pixels. Semicolon, height 500 pixels. Type in exactly what we had. Background color. Is going to be red. Semicolon, a bracket. I'm going to enter on down. And if you notice, so far, both the sidebars are overlapping each other, and that's okay at this point. And all websites also need a footer, so what I can do is basically just click, drag, and select the header selection under CSS. All of the code for it, go Control-C on my keyboard, and immediately just at the end of my bracket, hit enter, go on down, and then go Control-V. It'd be a Command-V on your Mac. Command-C, Command-V on Mac. PC is Control-C, Control-V. And we're basically going to just copy and paste that code for the header, and I'm just going to go ahead and name this footer. All right, because the footer is basically the same width as the header. Okay, and in order to see the right sidebar a little bit more clearly, I'm actually going to change its color to a different color. I'm going to go ahead and change this one to orange. And once that's applied, if you're noticing in your main window up here, you can see how the right sidebar now appears. Because the left and right were the same color, this gives you an idea of how just typing in colors instead of selecting from that color menu makes it very easy, and you can just go ahead and see how all your elements are placed here throughout. Okay, so let's go ahead and fix the right sidebar so it actually aligns correctly inside the container. And we have to do that through what's called positioning. So I'm going to go into again, the CSS section here, my CSS style sheet. And at the end of my semicolon, that I've changed it to orange, of course, I'm going to go ahead and just click and have the cursor flash, hit spacebar, and I'm going to type in position. Now what this allows us to do is actually position our sidebar, our right sidebar, because if you notice right now our left sidebar is where it needs to be, but we want to actually modify the right sidebar so it's on the right side. And we're going to actually use what's called absolute. So I'm going to do a colon, and I'm going to type in absolute. And if you want, you can just go ahead and go gung-ho and select it from the little submenu that pops up, a little helper. And then go ahead and hit semicolon. And then what we also want to do is we want to have a top and right position value of pixels. So I'm going to type in top. I'm going to have a colon, and I'm just going to go ahead for right now do 0 pixels just to show you kind of what's going on and do semicolon, and I'm also going to do a right, and I'm going to do a colon 0 px, which is pixels, and hit the semicolon to end it with the closing bracket. Now what does that do? Let's look at our layout here. It automatically updates because that's Dreamweaver. Has a little live update for you. Notice where the right sidebar is now in our layout. Now it's kind of up, it's over the header, not exactly where we want it to be. And that's because what we have to do is we have to use another positional value for our container. And at the end of the line of code we've already placed in here, the minimum height, I'm actually going to put the cursor between the ending bracket, that last semicolon at the end of min height, hit spacebar, and I type in position for it. And we want it with a colon to be what's called relative. And when I establish the relative, notice already in live view, the right sidebar is already understanding it's going to be relative to the container, as in, besides to the actual web page itself. So once I do relative, I'm going to end it with the semicolon inside that bracket. Now here is what's really, really great. I'm going to go back to the right sidebar, and I'm actually going to change top to the pixel value of 150. And once that's established, the top value, notice that it drops 150 pixels down, and it starts right below the header. And the reason why we did 150 is because, if you can recall, the header is 150 pixels in height, so it puts it right underneath. And if we look at it now, our scene and all our elements are completely organized how they should be. Okay, so just to actually have a, kind of a safe zone for the header, it's wise to use a like code between the right sidebar and the left sidebar. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go ahead and just type in the exact line of code here that's for the right sidebar for the left sidebar, just so the header has something to read from, which understands for both sides, both sidebars, which are exactly the same bar, just positioned in a different position within the container. So basically what I'm going to do is just after the left sidebar, I'm just going to click the little cursor, and before the ending bracket, just hit space. I'm going to name, I'm going to do a position. I'm just going to follow along with what I added for the right sidebar, position, and it's going to be absolute, just like it says below for the right sidebar, semicolon to end it, and do its top. And if you remember, its top is 150, so I'm going to do 150 pixels. Semicolon, space, and in this case, because it's the left sidebar, I'm actually going to do left because we don't want it to be on the right. So I'm going to do left, and for the left value, we are going to do 0 pixels, which is 0 px, and semicolon, and voila, perfect. Okay, so with our left and right sidebars aligned correctly for the layout, notice how the footer is right underneath the header. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the footer under the CSS, going to have that cursor float right after the ending semicolon before the ending bracket. And I'm actually going to just hit a space, so I'm going to type in position for it. And we want it to be an absolute position value, and then we want the bottom to be 0 pixels. So I'm actually going to type in bottom colon 0 px for pixels, and end it with the semicolon. And as soon as I make that adjustment, it understands it's going to place it at the bottom of that container, 0 pixels away from those sidebars with absolute positioning, and it's going to line up accordingly, and the whole layout is now built accordingly. Let's hit File, Save, and let's just, if we have to, we can go File, Save As, and we want to make sure we just override our index page and just hit Save. If you want to overwrite this file, hit Yes. You got to save before you can preview it in the browser to see the updates. So I'm going to go to File, Preview. Let's just preview in any browser you want. I'm a big Google Chrome fan. And sure enough, here it is. If I use the browser window and just looking at it real quick, and I basically click and drag the corner here and drag it in, and I drag the browser window back out, notice that the sidebars and the footer and the header all basically are completely responsive. It's a responsive web page now. They flow to the minimizing of the browser window, and no matter how I minimize it, just like responsive web design that you see in HTML5 today, that layout basically reflects it. So if I bring it in, everything scales accordingly to one another, and the footer and the header sidebars all remain intact. So this is exactly what we want.